George said right from the top, I think we ought to have really good drumming. So I think we ought to get Jim Keltner in. And we used to say, well, Jim, you're a Wilbury. And he goes, no, I'm a Sidebury. And we go, no, come on in and be a Wilbury. And no, I'm a Sidebury. But all of us would have been content to, have Jim as a Wilbury, but he didn't want to be. He wanted to, he just felt like my job is playing the drums and I'm in that area and that's where I'm going to stay. But that's just how beautiful the man is.
Hello again and welcome to I've Got a Beatles podcast with Dave and Chris. And today we're going to talk about a member of our series, Beatles Friends. And this is an important guy who... I don't know how much, Chris, you listen or you pay attention to session drummers in your usual day-to-day listening, but
that's all I do, Dave.
I know you're always
constantly prattling on about session drummers.
Exactly. But this person that we're going to talk about today is no stranger to anybody who knows anything about the solo Beatles, because he has been all over albums really from the 70s, 80s, and even more recently. So that would be Jim Keltner.
I'm a little embarrassed because we've talked about so many of these albums. And I don't really feel like we really talked about Jim Keltner that much during any of those discussions. So it was interesting to go back and listen to a little bit of, Somewhere in England, a little bit of some of these records. Focus about Mind Games, which we just talked about, and focus on the drumming on those particular tracks that he's on. Yeah, so that was like the eye-opening, interesting week of
all over the place. Yeah. And we've talked about another musician who sort of has a session. I mean, he at the same time he was kind of equivalent to Jim Keltner, and that would be Klaus Voormann playing. He was the bassist for a lot of George 70s albums, for Ringo 70s albums, and John too. So they were kind of the rhythm section that were playing a lot of these 70s albums. But Klaus was different because he actually was in a band that was famous before he became a session guy, whereas Keltner is pretty much, and we should say he's alive. He was born April 27th, 1942, and he's from Tulsa, Oklahoma. He's pretty much always been a session guy. He has fits and starts here and there with bands, but they never really weren't like Manfred Mann or something.
Your Delaney and Bonnie's.
Yeah.
A couple of things, a couple of projects where they tried to put a super group together, and he was in it, and they only had one album.
Right, exactly.
A couple things like
exactly.
that.
So he was really the session guy. And I should say that Tulsa, Oklahoma has a long history of lots of big name musicians, including one who I think may have been helpful to getting the Beatles connection. That's Leon Russell, who played piano, and then lots of other Delaney and Bonnie, a lot of people from Tulsa. And so Jim Keltner, I don't know if did you watch any interviews with him?
Oh, I watched a lot of interviews with him.
Me too.
The thing you're I gather mostly is the memory's a little. I mean, he's in his 80s now.
Yeah.
He's trying to recall like how he met John and things like that, and it's sort of like, wait, did I meet him? I met Yoko first, I think, and so it's a little bit unreliable right now. A
little fuzzy.
But he did have some good stories, so I'd suggest. I don't know. We'll go through all of these big stories or anything. Maybe one or two, but I'd suggest you just go on YouTube and type Jim Keltner interview, and you'll up will pop 3, 4, 5 different things. What was funny was one of them was for a Drummers World thing. They had a long discussion, and then towards the end he was like, "All right, do you want to do some drumming?" He was like, "No." So
nah.
I thought that was funny. But with someone with such a lengthy career, and one of these interviews they talked about whether or not he might be the most recorded drummer in history, or way up there along with the guy in the Wrecking Crew and a few other
Hal Blaine.
And a few other people. And he was like, I don't know. And I don't really want to know. I just like to do what I do. But his career stretches to in the 2020s, where he's been on two of the more popular albums of the 2020s. I'll come to that towards the end of the show. But with someone with such a lengthy career, the first thing you think about is versatility.
Yeah.
Particularly a session drummer, session players in general, they have to be able to play a wide variety of styles. And I think that's when you've got a song that needs a particular thing, particularly, he played with Ry Cooder a lot, and that's a very kind of specific sort of like almost Zydeco, not quite Zydeco, kind of like more Texan Zydeco mix. He's your guy,
Yeah.
But because of that versatility, I think at first I thought, well, he doesn't have a standout particular unique sound. Like if you hear like Keith Moon, for instance, you immediately are like Keith Moon. Yeah.
Or even Ringo.
But the more I listen to him, the more I'm like, oh, he does have a sound. And I went searching on some sites to get some descriptions of his sound, his style. And here's what I came up with. I forgive me because I just copied and pasted and forgot where I looked it up from. So I'm not citing the source here, but his drumming style typically melds deceptively simple drum patterns and a casual, loose feels with extraordinary precision. That was one description. Here's another. His drumming approach was idiosyncratic, loose, and soulful, and helped to elevate the studio musician's role from that of a generic hired hand to an individual colors music with personality and style. He's known not only for his great feel and sensitivity, but also for bringing a fresh approach to the potentially tedious world of pop music. And I think that's true. The more I listened, and I listened, Dave, I listened to every single thing he's ever been on. No, I didn't. But the more you listen to him, the more you get that kind of sense of a little bit of a looseness, a little bit of a more of a casual kind of like he's one of the drummers on Pussycats. So that's about as loose as you can get, loose and shuffly and all that. So
So I think one of the things to think about with a session drummer or a session musician, drummers are probably they're going to get the most gigs for one simple reason: the gear. The session drummers are drummers are just the hardest people to find because they have to have all the gear. And they have a notorious reputation for being a little flaky, and drummers just pack up their snare and say, "I'm out of here," and all that. But he is different because he, like you said in those quotes, I think in some ways to be a good session drummer, you can't be like a Keith Moon or somebody or John Bonham or somebody who's just so all over so recognizable, because people are always going to say, "Oh, that sounds like the Who," or that it's just too strong. You have to blend. You have to fit in to whatever style you're playing. And like we said, you've got Ry Cooder, known for his slide guitar and that style. Then you all the way up to John Mayer and all sorts of things in between. That he does have a versatility. And like you, I was listening and thinking, is there any style here? I can't quite tell. And I think there is a looseness. I think there's sort of I don't want to say weak, because I listened back to what I said on the Mind Games review, because I think I was kind of not totally positive about Keltner's playing. Because
Dave,
Jim, if you're listening, I'm sorry.
Jim, I'm sorry that Dave hated you on Mind Games so strongly. No. He hates Mind Games and the Beatles, by the way.
That's right. John Lennon never wrote a good song. But I thought on that album, it gave kind of a weak sound. And I think we felt that the Mind Games album had some weak tracks. And I think part of it was because it was a little too sleepy raspy on the drums. And I noticed in some of his other playing, the snare drum can be kind of thin sounding, and but it's more like a somebody who's orchestrating or coloring, and not just given a backbeat. Like the one guy he's often compared to is Jim Gordon, who was also on the All Things Must Pass album, and Derek and the Dominoes. Real, I mean, amazing player, but propulsive sound and driving, and you don't get that with Keltner, I don't think.
No, and he was sort of describing in one of those interviews, I think, of like your job really is to fill in, you know, to be part of the song, like see what the song needs and fill in the gaps, not to be the driving force of.
No.
Does Bob Dylan want you to be the driving force of his ever changing takes, or
right?
Are you there for the Bob Dylan? Did you show up for the Jim Keltner or the Bob Dylan, or
exactly
George or the Harry Nilsson?
Do you think he is, like I saw some comparisons to Ringo? Do you think he's sort of more in the Ringo vein of playing?
It was close. I mean, it was hard to tell on some of the tracks where they are. And in fact, the I mentioned already Pussycats, the Harry Nilsson album, and they're playing together on most of the tracks, except for track 7, which is the Mount Elga song that's really, really fantastic, where he's playing the drums and Ringo's playing like maracas or something. But like many of the other tracks on the album, it's 2 drummers. And that's not the only sessions where he's playing, like Time Out of Mind. I think there's him and another drummer and things like that. So
and a lot
hard
of those,
to tell who's playing what on a lot of those things.
One place you could tell is from if you're a Beatle fan you've never seen, or you haven't, the name Jim Keltner, but you haven't seen him. Well, we'll talk about it a little bit, but the first place you may have seen him is in the video for Concert for Bangladesh, and he's playing next to Ringo. So he's the guy with the long hair, and you'll see him. And then later on, and of course,
Concert for Bangladesh now streaming. Of course you know him from that. It's funny because he was talking about how much he doesn't like touring and really doesn't tour very much, and he'd much rather be playing sessions. But here he is, Concert for Bangladesh, and here he is also 1-to-1. Of course, the 1-to-1 concert with John and Yoko is coming out in a documentary. It should be out soon. He's on two of the few. Oh, and he's on the 90 or the 74. He was on the 74 George tour. So which maybe we'll eventually get that too. So it's funny because he's mostly a session guy, but here he is on some of the most famous Beatles solo live performances.
And then even a famous posthumous Beatle concert in the Concert for George. He's there too.
So of course.
Sitting right next to Ringo, just like he was 30 years before that at the Concert for Bangladesh. So he's been an ever-present figure in Beatle lore.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the what of the Beatles he's on, and let's go most to least here, kind of, and start with George, because obviously he and George got close, and at some point it was just like, okay, he's going to be on all of the George stuff. His first George record that he's on is Living in the Material World. Strange because I think that might be coming out in a few weeks in the remix, so we'll be able to hear crystal clear new Jim Keltner drumming on that. But he's also on Dark Horse, Extra Texture, Somewhere in England, Gone Tropo, Cloud 9, and Brainwashed. Okay. And, of course, Traveling Wilburys, where what was his name on Traveling Wilburys?
Buster something?
Sidebury. Buster Sidebury.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So very much intertwined with George and the George career. And that actually goes back to this is a perfect segue, because how did he even meet the Beatles or get involved? Well, he was playing with Delaney and Bonnie, the
Yeah.
husband-wife duo,
Yeah.
and Keltner was on tour or with them, or I don't know if he was on tour, but he played on the studio album, and then George and Eric Clapton ended up playing with Delaney and Bonnie, and they all sort of knew each other. Leon Russell was there, and so it just sort of took off from there.
Yeah.
And they got acquainted, and then John got involved with Jim Keltner for, well, we'll go to him next. But he and George, like you said, after All Things Must Pass, he became the guy for George, the drummer. And you can see him on the Living in the Material World. I pulled it out, my LP, the gatefold cover, which they're trying to do Da Vinci's Last Supper enactment, and you can see Jim Keltner there in the picture.
I think he's in a couple of the videos too, like he's playing a judge in, I think,
this song
or something, something like that. So, but he's all over those George records, and I think we're about to hit the golden years of remixed, re-released George. You know, Dark Horse, Extra Texture, Somewhere in England. All those probably will be coming out, and we'll be able to hear them even clearer and better.
And I might add, I've been on this trial of Apple Music, which I've really been loving, and they have those albums in Dolby Atmos now, so you can.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was listening to our favorite album, Extra Texture, the other day, and it really it does sound better, I have to say, and Jim Keltner's drums sound pretty good on some of your favorite tunes. Even they're very much with George, and when you get a name in the Traveling Wilburys, that's you've hit it.
I think too what you were saying about Keith Moon and those guys, they wouldn't have lasted that many records on.
No,
if Keith Moon had been kept stay alive, quit the Who, George would have been like, get the hell out of here, you crazy nut. You know, so Jim being kind of just a good guy,
normal guy,
is led him to be able to get along with George, and also to be able to get along with the irascible John Lennon, of course, and the John records. Well, he didn't play on Plastic Ono. Right. Because he didn't know him yet, I don't think. But he said that he met Yoko first, and then days later he's playing on Imagine.
Yeah, so there's a little problem with the chronology. I think.
He's kind of like confused of when things started. But he definitely played on Jealous Guy. He definitely played on, Imagine, Mind Games, which we just talked about, of course.
One of your favorite songs, I Don't Want to Be a Soldier, Mama. That's easy. There's two drummers on that one. He's on that.
Yep, and then Walls and Bridges, and I was just listening to Walls and Bridges.
Yeah,
again,
me too.
And I was like, oh yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And then rock and roll, and he, of course, there's always stories about rock and roll. When you've got John Lennon, and you've got Phil Spector. Both drinking, going crazy, you've got to be a kind of centered, sort of more a straightforward dude to get through those sessions.
And I think he was also very self-critical, because I don't know if you watched the same YouTube video that I did, but there was an interview with two guys, and they were playing his favorite songs. And at the end, he was playing Rip It Up by Little Richard. And then he said, oh, I played this with John Lennon too. And, and the guy says, oh, let me play it for you. Let's listen to it. So they listen to the beginning, and Keltner said, I would have done that differently if we had had another chance, and I missed John, and those sessions were just so crazy, and I just wish I had another chance to do it. And to me, it sounded fine, but he's very, very, he plays the song. And, that it was nice to see.
Well, he was talking about playing with Bob Dylan, and one of the songs, they're like, oh, how'd you get this great sound? And he's like, oh, that one, I accidentally didn't have my drums turned on. Oh. So they were like off, or they were muted, Oh,
the snares.
The snares. Yeah. And it was just he just wants to do a take and go. And then he used that take. Wow. So I would have totally done it differently, but that's how it goes,
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, he also played on a couple of Yoko albums, the Fly and Feeling the Space. I'm sure you were Feeling the Space.
Well, we talked about that because that was how that was recorded before Mind Games. So that's how that same group ended up playing on Mind Games too, that Jim Keltner was part of. He was kind of the odd man out because those other guys were, as we talked about with Mind Games, they were New York session guys. And so he joined the group. But yeah, he started playing with the Feel in the Space. I know that's one of your favorites too.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Well, a full review of Feeling of Space coming next. And then, of course, there's Ringo, and he played on Ringo, and he played on. We really should talk about Goodnight Vienna. One of these days.
Never talked about that one.
We can get around to it.
Yes, you can hear our last episode all about it.
And then Ringo's Rotogravure, of course, and then a little bit of a time off, and then back to for Stop and Smell the Roses, where he played on 3 or 4 tracks there. And then as far as Paul goes, as far as I could tell, the only time he performed with Paul was at the concert for George.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So he was on the stage the whole time, and Paul played a few tracks there. So so that's the list of connections with the Beatles. However, there are a few more. Of course, the Harry Nilsson album Pussycats, where not only would he, John produced it and John played on it, and also did Ringo, and he's playing drums with Ringo on most of the tracks. And I'd really give a listen to Mucho Mungo Mount Alba, because he's really great on that one.
I know you're a big Harry Nilsson fan. Do you? Because I know he played on a few other albums at that time, like Do It on Monday and Son of Schmilson. Do you know those albums?
Sandman.
Yeah.
Well, Nilsson Smilson, he played on that one, and that one's got Without You, and he plays on Without You, which is probably the most famous Harry Nilsson album, or song rather. So definitely, a few of those. Sandman. I haven't really dug into Flash Harry, and but that's the way it is. I think he played on that one. So, and the Lost Weekend kind of crew.
Yeah.
So that whole Lost Weekend story, and I just watched finally the May Pang documentary, which at some point maybe we'll talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Was eye-opening too, and very excellent. Lots of totally different than the way I thought things went down. For the Lost Weekend. But anyway, obviously Jim Keltner was part of that whole gang. Yeah, he's all over that era of the Beatles.
Yeah, and to that effect, I guess he was such a great hang, or someone to be around, that they made fun of him in a funny way. Now this was something interesting. So we have to talk about, because you said he didn't play with Paul, which is true. And so there was a couple interviews I saw where Keltner said, every time I tried to make a joke about Paul with George or Ringo or John, they would say, we can do that. You can't do that. You're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
And so but eventually it became sort of funny, because McCartney on the back cover of Red Rose Speedway, it says, fans can join the Wings Fun Club by sending a stamped addressed envelope to an address in London. And so then Harrison responds in Living in the Material World, and Ringo said, join the Jim Keltner fan club by sending a stamped undressed elephant to an address in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Huh. Is that, you're a comedy guy. Is that just golden comedy right there?
Oh, yeah. Best comedy ever. Best comedy ever.
Yeah. So the Jim fan club, but he was really part of that scene.
Yeah. So a couple of other artists here. I the bigger kind of artists I want to mention. Well, first was some of the earliest stuff he was on was Delaney and Bonnie. 1969, 1971, both of those albums. Eventually, maybe we'll get around to Delaney and Bonnie, because there's so many little connections with Eric Clapton and George and all of that kind of thing. I finally gave a listen. I've never once in my life listened to Delaney and Bonnie.
Oh wow! I've got a box set back there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. What do you think of that Delaney and Bonnie, just generally?
Well, I ended up getting a box set of the tour with George.
Oh.
So they toured about 5 or 6 places in England in '69, and Clapton was there, and it's I would say it's like rootsy rock with some soul, and someone described Delaney as having the most black sounding white voice that one could have. Like, he's really soulful as a singer, and Bonnie too. So it's a place for a lot of other musicians to play. Then that was a great group. He also got George's guitar from the rooftop concert. George gave it to him, which is, you can see in some videos online of Delaney playing with George, and he's playing that Telecaster. So a lot, like you said, a lot of connections there, but it's rootsy soul, kind of Southern rock is how I would describe it. Is that sort of what you would say too?
Yeah, I listened to the first record there, the original Delaney, Bonnie and Friends, except no substitutes or something like that. So not bad. It made me want to dig in a little deeper. You can't get to everything.
No, especially not in Jim Keltner's catalog, because it's huge.
However, I did listen to a little Shot of Love, Saved, Empire Burlesque, and Time Out of Mind. Of course, those are all Bob Dylan records. On Time Out of Mind, he's playing, there's somebody else, is like two drummers again on that one. But the other, Saved, Shot of Love, and Empire Burlesque, famously not that popular of Bob Dylan records. Saved's almost a gospel record. But it once again shows that versatility. The difference between Saved and Time Out of Mind is, pretty huge.
And if the credits are to be believed, one of my favorite songs on Time Out of Mind is Standing in the Doorway. And it says that Keltner's the only drummer on that song. So if that's the case, then it's a beautiful album anyway, but that drum sound is so sweet. So it works well.
And then I dived in a little bit to the extensive 11 albums with Ry Cooder.
Yeah.
And I just haven't listened to much Ry Cooder, but I enjoyed it. It was very good. How
do you describe it? Because I know that all I know him is a guitar player, slide player. So is it kind of rootsy rock or country-ish, or?
Yeah, well, he's best known for his slide guitar. I've seen him way up there on lists of all-time great guitarists. I think he was number 8 on the Rolling Stone list of that. But it's kind of hard to describe his style. It's definitely it draws from many genres, I think, his work. But it's very Texas feeling. It's very like southern desert kind of kind of feeling type stuff. So a little bit of, like I said, a tiniest little Zydeco, a little bit of this, a little bit of that,
Okay.
So it's kind of very difficult to describe. But I enjoyed it very much. It made me want to go back, and maybe I can speak more intelligently after I listen to more.
Well, it's a lot of albums too.
I was in one of them is Chicken Skin Music, which is all covers. I listened to that one. I listened to Borderline, I think was a pretty good one. So, so here, he's worked. Some people are like, oh, he's my go-to guy. But then in other cases, like for instance, he's on Dreamweaver, the Gary Wright hit. He's on Josie, the Steely Dan hit.
The Asia album, isn't he? I think he's on that.
Yeah. He's on an artist I just saw live performing in Evanston. Wonderful artist, Richard Thompson. He's on 4 Richard Thompson albums.
Did you know this? Because you're a diehard Richard Thompson fan. Did you know this?
No, I didn't. I do. I'm famously, I listen to the music. I don't necessarily like sit around like with my. Which these days, particularly with CDs, you got to have one of these bad boys to.
I know. I have to have my
credits. This is I'm holding up a magnifying glass.
Yeah, seriously.
In fact, I bought a big one over there. I'll show it.
Excellent.
To you later. But so he's on 4 different Richard Thompson albums. Love Richard Thompson. He's on a couple more albums of artists I like, Michael Penn on his first 2 records, March and Free for All. He's on a couple Neil Young albums, including the wonderful Silver and Gold, which we were gushing about off air.
Yeah, one of our favorite songs by Neil Young is Razor Love, and that's just like, if you want to hear the Jim Keltner sound, the looseness, but it's still together. It's just sweet sound, like I say.
The thing about the looseness of his playing is it never feels out of time.
No.
It just feels like he knows where to stick in the things to make it all smooth sailing. But just to show how he stays relevant, he was on in 2020. He was on Phoebe Bridgers' album Punisher, which is you can't even keep a vinyl in stock of that. They have to do repressings of, because it's such a popular album. And 2023, one of the biggest albums of 2023, Lana Del Rey, and he plays on the title song from the album, which is called "Did You Know That There's a Tunnel Under Ocean Boulevard," which is a fantastic song. Just, here he is, and now he's on the Outlaw Tour with, Willie and John Mellencamp and Dylan. So
a couple other Beatle-related connections. In the 2010s, he played on Fistful of Mercy's debut album.
Oh, that's right.
As I Call You Down. Yeah, which has Danny Harrison. That was one of his solo projects, which he brought in Keltner because he already knew him very well. And then another Beatle connection that goes back to the 70s. You had mentioned way back in the beginning of the episode about these super groups. And there was one sort of, not quite a super group, but he had a band called Attitudes. And had Danny Korchmar, or otherwise known as Danny Cooch, and David Foster and Paul Stallworth, the bassist, and they recorded 2 albums for Dark Horse Records in 75 and 77. So so there's other connection, and just so many. He plays on one of your favorite songs, Short People by Randy Newman.
Yeah, oh jeez. Oh boy. Yeah, but if you run down the list, it's like Warren Zevon, Ronnie Wood, Bill Wyman, Brian Wilson, both Rufus and Loudon Wainwright.
Yeah.
Toto. Rob Thomas, Matthew Sweet, James Taylor, Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
Steely Dan. Yeah. So it just keeps going,
he even said that when he played on Knocking on Heaven's Door, the Bob Dylan version, that he was crying because the song was so beautiful. So there's another. I mean, it's just amazing.
Leon Russell, Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
On the Momentary Lapse of Reason, their first one without Roger Waters. Dolly Parton, Van Dyke Parks, all these great artists. The Roy Orbison 89 album Mystery Girl, that's like kind of his big comeback album, which has Anything You Want, You Got It on it. And then, of course, Randy Newman, a few of those albums. Joni Mitchell, Turbulent Indigo on that album. Dave Mason, Melissa Manchester, Amy Mann.
Basically everybody.
Yeah. B.B. King, four different B.B. King albums,
Man.
Naming these names off, it's like, wow, that's a lot of different styles.
Yeah, right. The versatility.
And he was talking about how he and John had been talking, and John's like, "You're a rock guy, right?" And he's like, "No." I loved jazz.
Yeah.
So I never liked rock and roll at all. Whereas John, it's like,
that was his bread and butter.
He's like, I can't believe you don't, But then he ends up playing on rock and roll. So, he'd eventually grow to love rock and roll, but he definitely wasn't. Oh, here's another connection. Elvis Costello.
Yeah.
Of course, that sort of side connection to Paul there.
Yeah.
But it goes on and on. Leonard Cohen, Joe Cocker, Jimmy Cliff, Cher.
Barbara Streisand.
Yeah. J.J. Cale played on 5 different J.J. Cale albums. Of course, Michael Bublé's Christmas album from 2011 that Dave insists on playing all December.
Can't wait. No, it's truly incredible. I don't know how he slept or was able to do all these things, but it shows you can make a living. Like his idol, one of them was Hal Blaine, who we mentioned earlier, and just being able to be on so many tracks like that.
Yeah.
But you can't think of any of those early Beatles, at least let's say 71 to 77 or so,
Yeah.
without Jim Keltner being an integral part of those albums and that sound. So he's somebody I wish, well, maybe I don't wish he would write a book or have a,
Yeah.
because maybe the memory is a little
Yeah,
rusty.
the one interview I saw, he was just sort of like, boy, it seemed like he was, he was just kind of like not really putting together his thoughts very, very well. But it's hard to remember.
Well,
I mean, I can't remember much about, say, my college years.
No.
And I'm, just in my 50s here, but if I'm in my 80s, I'm going to really not remember.
I know, especially when you're playing with this many people and this many years, it's a lot to keep straight.
Yeah.
But if we had to pick, let's say, a couple songs that really impressed you, I think you mentioned a couple already. What would, from the Beatle years, are there any that stand
Mucho
out?
Mungo, let's do that one. Okay. And then let's do what else? Well, from Walls and Bridges, you got several there, I think, that where the drum really stands out. Like What You Got, for instance. So that would be, and Whatever Gets You Through the Night, of course. And then Jealous Guy, of course. He talked a lot about Jealous Guy on one of the interviews. So and then all of Extra Texture, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you got to go Troppo too.
And you got to go Troppo. That's right. That's right. Yeah. No, I agree. I listened to Dark Horse too, and some of the playing on So Sad and Simply Shady. It gives.
Oh yeah, I love the drums on Simply Shady.
Yeah.
It's excellent. Yeah.
Very, I don't want to say, people, I saw on a YouTube clip, somebody said, oh, Jim Keltner's so underrated. And I thought, no, he's not. He's one of the most famous, important drummers. He's not underrated.
Yeah.
But I think his playing, or his on that album, which, has some problems, Dark Horse album, he helps it a lot. And some really tasteful playing on that album.
Yeah.
So, and then like we said, when Living in the Material World comes out in a couple of weeks next month, we will have a new listen to hear Jim Keltner's playing again on that.
Yeah.
So looking forward to that.
Yeah. Which let's segue that
few news
into a few news items, just because you just brought that up. I'll bring up first that, of course, we got that set coming out on November 15th. But right now, you can go and now listen to Be Here Now, both the new mix and also Take 8. Yeah. So they're both out. So give them both a listen. I listened to both this morning, actually. Very good.
Yeah.
So that's two songs you can listen to. And of course, the very next thing you'll want to listen to is Time on My Hands. That's the first track from Ringo Starr from his full-length album, first full-length album in 6 years, to be released on January 10th, 2025, produced and co-written by T-Bone Burnett.
Look up. T-Bone Burnett's older than I thought he would be. I guess I don't know anything about him. He just saw an interview. I said, oh, wow, he's like Ringo's age. There's
going to be a special thing, which right after the album comes out on January 14th and 15th, Ringo Starr and friends are going to play 2 nights of country music at Ryman Auditorium, one of the most famous Nashville venues. So that should be pretty crazy. And I think the tickets for that are already on sale, maybe even already sold out. Who knows? But look into that, particularly if you're in Nashville. You gotta
Oh,
you
yeah.
gotta see that. It might be like the one of the better events, you know.
Did you happen to listen to that song or any
Yeah, I
thoughts on
listened.
that song?
Yeah, it was not bad.
Yeah.
It didn't like
Yeah.
thrill me like, oh my God, this is the
No.
best thing. But I tell you what, I really like the look of the album cover, which is just Ringo
Oh, yeah.
with a cowboy hat on.
Looks cool. Yeah.
So that
Fits him
looks
well.
cool. And T-Bone Burnett has a fantastic track record, particularly with
Yeah.
the two Robert Plant and Alison Krauss albums, which are two of my favorite albums of the last 20 years. Both of them fantastic albums. That's T-Bone Burnett handiwork there. So
Yeah.
so we'll see how it goes, but I'm encouraged. I think it's
Sure.
10 or 11 tracks, so and a full length. Now that's strange. I thought he was done with
This is just, he's told us how many interviews. Like, oh no,
Yeah.
we just write EPs. It's a lot
Yeah.
easier. Full tracks, get them out. That's all we need. An album's dead, and here we are.
Yeah.
With the full length album coming out. So, yeah.
But we're burying the big news, which when we recorded last time, we knew. I had the long news segment on the last time, right? We went through a lot of news, and then less than 24 hours after we recorded and dropped the episode, we get the news. Beatles' 1964 trip to America, chronicled in a new documentary from producer Martin Scorsese and director David Tedici, titled Beatles 64, released on Disney Plus on November 29th. Features never before seen footage of the band and its legions of young fans during the height of Beatlemania. Also includes new interviews with the two surviving Beatles, Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, and I think we'll also get very much upgraded sound on the Ed Sullivan performances and things of that nature. So really kind of pulls together this whole 2024 as the year of the Beatles 64 America thing.
Yeah, because
2025 might be the year of, considering that's a 60-year anniversary, might be the year of Rubber Soul, but this year is very much focused on this. I'm thrilled. I think it'll be great to have a new documentary about the Beatles 64 stuff.
Well, yeah, I'll be curious to see. It was at the same time of year a few years ago that we had the Get Back release during Thanksgiving in the United States. So that it'll be the same day after Thanksgiving, sounds like. And so Scorsese has a good track record with documentaries, obviously as a filmmaker, but his documentaries like The Last Waltz or the George Harrison Living in the Material World. So, he's not a stranger to Beatles material. I'll be curious to see how it compares to the Ron Howard one, the documentary about touring. We'll see if there's some overlap or if there's any comparison there. But I know that was touring in general. But I'll be interested to see what he comes up with, and if there really is new footage, we're all for it to see something different, because this has been well-trodden material.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how many times I watched the, a pretty good Beatles' first U.S. visit, which was filmed by the Maisels, who did all of the great documentaries of the time, music documentaries at least. So, and of course they're famous for the Grey Gardens, which is a great documentary too, which my wife absolutely loves. She's probably watched it like 7 times. So I'm sure the footage from that they filmed is part of this still, but new footage, give it to me.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm into it. So, so I'm sure it'll be a fun watch. So that's I'm never gonna be like, oh no, a new Beatles documentary.
No, definitely.
Yeah. So that combined with all the news we gave last week, it's like, oh boy,
Yeah.
Lots to keep up with.
It is a lot to keep up with. It's not really it's not a blockbuster like the Get Back thing or a Rubber Soul set or something like that. But it's a lot of things that are helping to fill out the picture and are interesting for a lot of reasons that relate to solo and group material. So I think it's always interesting. Are there any other recordings coming out? I don't think of any particularly.
I don't think so. There's some books coming out. We'll talk about some of those probably just on our gifts episode when we do that, because there's several very Elliot Mintz. I am Elliot Mintz, and I have a book. One. So Elliot Mintz, and of course I'm really looking forward to the McCartney Legacy Part 2, which is the second it was announced, I got my pre-order in. That's how much I like the first McCartney Legacy book. So so we got some books, and I think that John Lennon book's out too, the Mind Games.
That's been out now. We've seen a few people have been doing unboxings and showing pictures of it, of course. We'll keep you posted on anything that comes up, and maybe I'll post a few links to Jim Keltner's. In fact, actually, there are a couple of playlists that people put together on Apple Music and Spotify that put together a lot of these tracks, so you don't have to go hunting for them. So I'll post the links to those in case you want to just be amazed at how much Jim Keltner has played on. And if Jim's listening, you know where to find us. I've got a Beatles podcast at hotmail.com, and we will be happy to talk to you about some of this material.
And if any of you want to chime in on anything, feel free to use that link and send us a message there, or on our Facebook page, of course, or at I've Got a Beatles on X while it still exists.
Exactly. So
I have a funny feeling in a couple of weeks that whole site might be shut down for some reason.
Oh boy!
But we'll see all about that.
And on that note, we'll leave it there because we got a lot going on in this country right now. So thanks as always for listening, and we'll be back at you soon with a new episode.